Hi, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'd like to do another bonus video for you guys. This time we were doing another interview question. As you may or may not know, over the past month and a half, 2 months, I've been looking for another job, which I have secured. I start in a couple of weeks, which is great news. But I would like to share with you guys the kind of questions that I was asked in the interview process. And this is really, I think, one of the things that can happen is when people are looking for programming jobs, they don't really quite know what to expect in terms of technical tests and stuff like that. The interviews that I had this time round, none of them involved really kind of arbitrary logic tests, really, like counting the number of bits in an integer and things like that. They were kind of applied knowledge. There was some code reading as well, but this is one of the actual questions, one of the coding things that I had to go through, and I thought I would share it with you guys. The interview consisted of me and remote session via Teams or something like that, and we did screen sharing, and there was me being watched by 3 other guys, which was quite interesting. But it's great because you're there with your own machine, and you're there with an actual computer, and you're there with Visual Studio with all of the IntelliSense and the debugging tools and all of that kind of stuff. So that was really good. You didn't have to write kind of code on the fly with that. Okay, so let's get right into it. So what I have done here is I've just created a .NET 5 console application, and this is straight up as Visual Studio generates it, and it builds, and we can see that we got a hello world. That's great. So the question that I was asked, if anybody is familiar with Minesweeper, they will see that directly. So a field of n times m squares is represented by n lines of exactly m characters each. The character asterisk or star represents a mine, and the character dot represents no mine. An example input of a 3x4 mine field of 12 squares, 2 of which are mines, is thus this. Ding, ding, ding. Your task is to write a program to accept this input and produce an output of a hint field of identical dimensions where each square is a star for a mine, or the number of adjacent mine squares if the square does not contain a mine. Example output is this. So in this case, what you will be expected to do is to write a program. In this particular interview, I had set stuff up to do unit testing and all of that kind of stuff, but as we were going straight into here, it was kind of obvious that this kind of didn't require unit testing. And the interview was only really it was 2 hours long, and this was the time scheduled for this part was an hour. And so really, we created just a console application to do this. So the first step is to process the input into some kind of memory structure, and the second step is to actually calculate all of this data, and the third step is to actually output it. So I can take you through that, guys. Right. So what we would do is we would create a new class, and this class I called Minesweeper because that's what it is. So we generate that. And we do things like it's only internal into this program, so internal sealed. I tend to seal all of my classes because one of the solid things is, you should be open for inheritance, but closed for modification. And one of the things I did read earlier on in my career was that if your class is not designed to be inherited, then don't allow it to be inherited, because then you can have certain things that can cause issues. Right, okay, so we're going to need some so essentially what we did to begin with, we have this class, and we are going to need some input. So what I did was okay, so what I started to do was, in this particular case, is we would need um, uh, function to process the input, process input, and in this case, we would read a string from a file, and so we would have this string to input. Of course, as per usual, I can't type properly when you guys are watching me. So interesting enough, what I had started to do was I had started to actually write the actual function to generate to take the string which we had, which was going to be in this case you would have this. So what we would say is we could say we'll do a private string, and we will call it raw data, and inside a constructor for the raw for Minesweeper we could say, okay, raw, we could say var sb equals new string builder, and we could say sb.append line, and we're going to do 1, 2, 4 of those. No, not append join, append line. Can't type. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we would just copy these into here as such. And then we'll set this to raw data equals sb.toString. And we can set this to read only because we only set it up in the constructor, and that's great. And what we'll do real quick is we will say in here var ms equals new Minesweeper, and then we can do some things with the Minesweeper in here, and we could say we can make that static because we're not going to need anything in here. Yes, make it static. Good, awesome, great. And we can see if we do build on that, and we'll build. Except, of course, we don't have this input here. So what I had in this case was we could call it here. We could say process input, and what we'll do is we'll provide the raw data here, and we could see here is I was we could say we want something here. So we need a 2D array to store the information, and we could say, this will say, we'll call this processed input. And that's what we have here. We're creating. So essentially, the way this worked is during the conversation, I was basically saying, okay, we first of all calculate the number of rows. And so the rows of input data is splitting on the new line, which is /n, and then the dimensions would be the first row. So in this case, we would get 3 and 4, and we could see that. So if I comment out this part here and put a breakpoint here, if I run it, we can see some things going on inside the code. So here we go. So our input looks like that. where we have yeah, that's exactly the same as we would expect. And so we can say there are 5 rows, and this is what they look like. Except we have a blank one there, which is interesting. Calculate the dimensions is 2 strings, 3 and 4. And then what we would do is we would get these things here. So with number of columns is 3, number of rows is 3, number of columns is 4. And we can see that 1, 2, 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. And we would then create our processed input, which is 3 and 4. And we would continue. And then for obviously what we would do is we'd say, okay, for each row, which would go each string, and for each column, each character, we would then pick out this information. And they were really happy with that, with the progress of that. And they said, okay, for expediency of time, if we just generate the array of how we exist. So they saw that I was going down in the right direction with that. And so we said, okay, fine. What we can do now is we will basically generate the arrays and information that I needed as if this process input function had already been written. So in this case, what we end up with is we end up with a multi-dimensional array, 3 rows, 4 columns, and this is what we end up having here. Great. The next step is to say what we need is we need to then say, okay, we need to take, so we have this now in memory, and now we have space for this in our output. Yep. And insert easier to mess around with because we're going to be doing numbers. Yeah. So you wouldn't use chars here because what you want is you basically want the actual number of mines. And what we can do is we can, as you'll see later, I set a flag to say, hey, this number, this special number means that this element is a mine. So we have, let's get rid of this because we don't need it anymore. We can get rid of it and get rid of all this. So what we have next is we have an internal private function called generate output, because that's what we're going to do. We'll take the input, we'll convert them. And again, we're going to have 2 loops. We're going to have 4. That is not what we need. We need ints row equals 0. And then row is less than max rows because, yeah, we got 3. 1, 2, 3. Row. Yeah. And then for each row, we need to go. So we need to examine each element in this array. So we have to do this. We say int col equals 0. Col is less than max cols. Col plus plus. Now, one of the things that you may get asked is, is it worth moving this to some kind of parallel.4? This number is really low. This number is also really low. So really, that the time taken to spin up an extra thread to do all this would actually take more time than it would to go through the whole memory structure. If these were like 3,000, 4,000, I mean, even that's going to be really fast on. I currently have an i7 here, so it's going to be really fast on that. So, it's again. So what we do now is we say, okay, first of all, let's see what we're dealing with. So if we are dealing with row and column, now if that is not equal to a star, then this isn't a mine. We need to do something with this. Now, this is a mine. Yeah. So we can say in our output, just need to do one thing here. Here we go. We need to copy this line here. We actually need to say, we need to resize our output array to be the same as our input array. We can say that so if we're not equal to star, we're going to do something here. If we are equal to star, we are a mine. And what we'll do is we'll set this to -1. And then in our display logic, we'll say if it's -1, yeah, then we'll display a star. So that will take care of this part of the output requirement. And what we can say here is we can say row, column. What we want to do is we want to say count mines around us. And we're going to specify where we are in our grid. Okay. And so we will need another function. And it's going to be this one. Now, let's get this to build. Okay. What we need to do is we need to say, okay, we're inside. If we are here, then we need to look at this. We need to look at all of our neighbors. So if we're here, say for this mine here, we need to look at this one, this one, this one, this one, and or the diagonals, this one, this one, this one, and this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we need 8 checks. And basically what you'll do is you will say if row -1 is greater than or equal to 0, yeah. So this is what we're saying here now is if we are here, can we go up 1? Can we go up 1? If it's so in this case, if row -1, that's going to be, we're already at row 0, so that's going to be -1. So we can't. There's no neighbor here. But if we're here, we're on row 1. Row -1 is 0. Is that greater or equal to 0? Yes. So we can actually count that. Yeah. So that's our check. This is our above us. Our row. Are we still in the grid vertically going up? And if the input at row -1, but we're going to stay on the current column. I should choose that name probably. Yep. If it is equal to a mine, then what we're going to do is we're going to increment result. Yep. So that basically checks the grid above us. And then we do the same. We do the same going down. So we look at. So in this case, we looked up. That's the first case. In the next case, we look down. And in this case, the check is row +1 is less than max rows. Great. And then we do left and right. So again, for column, if we're here, we can't go this way, can't go over here because there's nothing here. So that's where we do the check. And if we're here, we can't go to the right of us because there's nothing there. So again, check left if it's greater than 0, check right, and then we just say great if it's the one that we're looking at. So we've done top, bottom, left, and right, and now we do the diagonals in both directions. So again, this is just essentially imagining that you're in a grid, and what you are doing is you are going, can I go up? Can I go up? Can I go down? Can I go left? Can I go right? Can I go up and left? Can I go up and right? Can I go down and right? Can I go down and left? And that's essentially what we're looking at here. And then what we do is if we just basically say, if it is a mine, then we increment the result. And then, of course, we return the result. And so that's what we have here. We go through and we say, if it's not a mine in the input, go and have a look at all of our neighbors and count up how many are mines. And if we are a mine, we use -1. And then again, what we do now is we just need we'll need a way of displaying this. So we say, do we have a display output? We want a string builder. We're going to display that. And then all we do is, again, is we go for each element in our array, we're going to say our count of mines around position. We're going to read this, yeah? And we can say real quickly that in our output, if it is greater than -1, yeah, if it's greater than -1, it could be 0. There could be no mines around us. If it's greater than -1, if this is true, then we output the number. If it is equal to -1, we're a mine, so we output a star. And then what we do is between each column, not between each column, so for each row here, there's a row, here's a row, here's a row, and if we want this on a new line, then we need to append between every time we finish a complete row, we need to append a new line, and that is the environment.newLine. That is a character string that represents the new line, which is great. And then how do we put all this together? So what we do is we say, what we'll have is we will call generate output in our constructor. If I could type. And we'll say in here inside our program, we will display the output here. And if we run that, we should build. And here we go. Here we are. That is exactly the same as, nope, we get it here. So that is the same as that. That's the same as this, which is great. So we've successfully completed this coding example successfully. It's pretty straightforward. We could then go on to questions. So questions that I was asked is like, okay, can I change this variable name? Can we choose about variable name differences? Function names. I mean, these guys saw me type this out manually. Questions about parallelism, multi-threading, maybe. Is it suitable to do this? I mean, we're reading here, so we don't have to do any log. Reading is fine. Writing is where you need writing to memory structures when you have multiple things, but we're just reading here, so we wouldn't need to do any locking. We could add like a stopwatch here, so you could calculate the time. But because our input data is so tiny here, it's so tiny. This is our input data. I would say that parallelism is not suitable for this task. If this was in the order of, say, 3,000 to 4,000 or whatever, not only do you have a square, an n function, an O to the n function, and then of course you have this other thing, which then you are looking around each time. But again, this isn't using any loops. This is just a straight, essentially I'm looking at this point in the array, this other point, 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 8 times. So this actually is going to be pretty fast. There's no loops in here. So this is going to be pretty fast. So even if you were using, 3,000, 4,000, would you have, you know, would you have any performance increase doing a parallel.for, or even throwing it up in a new thread, or something like that? For each row, fire up a new thread, queue a work item on a thread, on the thread pool. Swings and roundabouts. I'd probably say no. Other things you do, you could change the color. If it was a mine, you could, you could use some of the console outputs to change color if you wanted to. But yeah, that is a real world interview question, and I had to do it with 3 guys watching me. Again, probably with the discussion and everything, me typing out those lines individually probably took about an hour to do. The questions about unit testing, and they were like, one of the questions was, well, why didn't you do unit tests for this? And the answer to that is that it was very directed. It wasn't something I could go away and do with it. And certainly with with unit tests, you could provide this input, and then you could say, in our count mines, we know that this position, say 2, 3, has n number of mines, and you would provide that with your test data, and that was how you would test that. There's no error checking here. We're going from max rows. So we don't. We could put, if row is greater than 0 and column is, inside here, we could do some boundary checking, that kind of stuff. But really, that was it. That was pretty straightforward, and hopefully that helped you guys a little bit in what to expect in a real world programming interview question. So yeah, if you found that useful, that's great. Please consider liking and subscribing, because the engagement algorithms really like that, and that will help promote the channel. So thanks again, and thanks for watching. Take care.